The sun rose slowly over the small town of Willow Creek, painting the sky with hues of gold and lilac. The old windows of the houses reflected the soft light that only country mornings can have. Martha, wearing her flowered apron and holding a steaming cup of coffee, watched the quiet street. It was just another ordinary day, until a strange sound shattered the usual stillness. An old, faded blue car pulled up in front of the old train station. Hardly anyone had used the place since the last train passed decades ago. A man slowly got out of the vehicle, leaning on a dark wooden cane. He looked tired, as if carrying the weight of many lives on his shoulders. But what caught Martha's attention most was the old brown suitcase he held tightly. Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, for His love is eternal and infinite. I also want to take this opportunity to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot, thank you. Now, take a deep breath, because what comes next will touch your heart in an unexpected way. Martha narrowed her eyes, trying to place that aged face. Her heart raced in a way it hadn't since her youth. The man looked around as if searching for something long lost. And when his eyes met hers, something inexplicable happened. A heavy silence formed between them, as if the past had come back to life. Their neighbor, Helen, appeared on the porch with her newspaper and noticed the stranger. "Have you seen that man, Martha? He looks like something out of an old movie," she said, laughing. But Martha didn't answer. There was something in that look, something that reminded her of a name she'd sworn never to speak again. A name the wind whispered on cold Willow Creek nights. The man took a few steps toward the corner coffee shop. Each movement was slow, measured, as if he feared the very ground he was treading. Martha, overcome by a force she didn't understand, let her coffee cool and crossed the street. When she got close enough, she could see the time etched on his face, deep lines, teary eyes, and an expression of regret that hurt to look at. "Excuse me, sir, do you need any help?" she asked, her voice trembling. He looked up, and what he said next made her heart skip a beat. "Martha, do you still live here?" The cup nearly slipped from her hands. It had been over 40 years since anyone had called her that, with that same soft, memory-laden intonation. Her legs felt weak. "Thomas," she whispered. The name came out like a secret time had tried to bury. The man nodded slowly. "Yes, it's me." The wind blew between them, lifting dry leaves that danced like ghosts from the past. And in that instant, everything in Martha changed. Her eyes filled with tears. Thomas, the one everyone believed had died in a fire decades ago, was there, before her. Alive. Aged, but alive. And the brown suitcase, that ancient suitcase, marked by scratches and dust, seemed to pulse, as if it held something that wanted to escape. Martha took a deep breath and looked around. A few people began to notice the scene. Murmurs spread. "Is that really him?" someone whispered. "It can't be," said another. Willow Creek had always been too small a town for big secrets. And this was the biggest of them all. "You need to come in, Thomas." "Come on, it's cold," she said, opening the door to her house. He hesitated for a moment, looking around as if fearing the judgment of ghosts. Then he stepped inside. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air, bringing back memories of a time that fate had destroyed without warning. The wall clock read 10 past 10 when he set the suitcase on the table. The cracked leather let out a soft crack, as if sighing with relief. Martha stared at it with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "May I ask what's in there?" she asked, trying to sound calm. Thomas simply replied, "Everything that's left unanswered." Her hands trembled. "Thomas, what happened to you? Everyone thought you were dead." He smiled, but it was a sad, broken smile. "Martha, sometimes you have to die to come back." The sentence echoed in the air, leaving her breathless. What had he meant by that? As steam rose from the kettle, Martha realized how cruel time had been. Thomas was no longer the easy-smiling boy who had danced with her at summer parties. But there was something deeper, a shadow in his eyes, as if he carried a sin that prevented him from sleeping. The suitcase remained there, silent but powerful. The neighbor, curious, peered through the window. "Martha, is everything okay?" she called. She simply replied, "Yes, Helen." Everything's okay. But she wasn't. The air was heavy. Something in that house seemed to be waking from a long slumber. It was as if the walls remembered him, too. Thomas looked at the old photos on the furniture. He touched one in particular, a group of smiling young people in front of a barn. "That day," he murmured. Martha looked away. "Don't talk about that day, Thomas. Please." He nodded silently, clutching the suitcase tightly. Outside, the wind began to blow harder, rattling the windows. Martha felt a shiver run through her. That suitcase, something in it seemed to pulse, alive. "Do you want to open it?" she asked, trying to hide her trembling voice. "Not yet," he replied. "I'm not ready for that." As the clock ticked away, the tension mounted. Every word between them felt like an unspoken prayer. Thomas spoke little, but every look spoke volumes. And Martha, even as she tried to be rational, sensed something much bigger was about to surface, something that could change everything she believed about the past. As dusk fell, he asked to walk to the lake. Martha accompanied him in silence. The same lake where, so many years ago, everything had begun and ended. The sound of water lapping against the rocks brought back painful memories. "Do you still come here?" he asked. "I never stopped coming," she replied, a lump in her throat. Thomas stopped, leaned on his cane, and looked toward the horizon. "Martha, do you believe God gives second chances?" She replied with tears in her eyes, "I do, Thomas. But sometimes He takes us through the desert first." He nodded, and a slight smile appeared, as if he had expected to hear exactly that. The sunset reflected off the suitcase, making the leather glow copper. Thomas held it tightly. "Inside this is more than just memories," he said. "There's something you need to know." Martha shivered. "And what is it?" He looked at her with tenderness and pain. "I can't say it yet. But soon, it will all make sense." That night, Martha couldn't sleep. Every creak in the old house sounded like a whisper from the past. She prayed silently, asking God for discernment. "Lord, what has He brought back to me?" she murmured. And deep in her heart, she knew that answer wouldn't come easily. Thomas, staying at the local inn, also stayed awake. On the table, the suitcase remained closed, but a small crack in the latch revealed something metal inside. He took a deep breath. "Tomorrow," he told himself. "Tomorrow, I'll tell you everything." But tomorrow would bring much more than he imagined. The next day, Martha made breakfast early. She didn't know what to expect, but something inside her told her life was about to change. When she heard his footsteps on the sidewalk, her heart raced again. And for the first time in a long time, she was afraid of the past, afraid that by opening that suitcase, he would also open wounds that had never healed. He entered, silent, with the same distant look. "Are you ready?" he asked. Martha took a deep breath. "I don't think I ever will be." Thomas set the suitcase on the table and ran his hand slowly over the aged leather. "Neither do I." Then, slowly, he began to undo the latch. A click echoed in the air. Martha held her breath. But before she could see the contents, a loud knock on the door interrupted the moment. 3 knocks, firm, urgent. They both looked at each other, startled. "Who could it be at this hour?" she asked. Thomas paled. "If it's who I think it is, don't open it." Martha felt her stomach churn. The suitcase, now half open, seemed to beckon her. The sound of the wind grew louder outside, as if fate itself were holding its breath. And as she took the first step toward the door, something inside her told her that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. The doorknob turned on its own. A click echoed through the house. And from the other side, a hoarse, familiar voice murmured her name. Martha froze. Thomas struggled to his feet, his face filled with terror. And what happened next? You won't believe it. The cold morning wind blew in through the half-open door. Martha stood motionless, staring at the silhouette looming outside. A tall man with a worn hat and a deep voice broke the silence. "Sorry to disturb you, ma'am. I'm looking for Thomas Hayes." The name echoed through the house like thunder. Thomas, behind her, paled. "Who are you?" Martha asked, trying to remain calm. The visitor looked up, revealing clear, tired eyes. I am someone who has waited a long time for this moment. Thomas stepped forward, leaning on his cane. Robert, it can't be you. The stranger nodded. It's me, brother. The shock was immediate. Martha put her hand to her chest. Brother, she repeated, not understanding. Thomas closed his eyes, as if trying to hold back old tears. Yes, Martha. This is my little brother. Robert entered without waiting for an invitation. His footsteps echoed across the wooden floor, heavy with anger and pain. I thought you were dead, Thomas. How dare you come back now? Martha watched in silence, not fully comprehending the magnitude of what she saw. Two siblings face to face, separated by decades and a past they both tried to forget. Thomas, his voice hoarse, simply replied, I needed to go back. There's something that needs fixing. Robert clenched his fists. Fixed? After everything? His words cut through the air like blades. Martha felt like she shouldn't be there, but something inside her told her God wanted her to hear. What happened between you two? She asked softly. Thomas looked away. Things that time tried to bury. Robert looked at her and murmured, So the past has come back to bite us. Hours later, when Robert was gone, the silence in the house seemed even heavier. Martha sat down in front of the closed suitcase and asked, Thomas, what did he mean by that? He was slow to answer. There are truths that have lain dormant for too long, Martha, and waking them can bring pain. She looked out the window at the sky and murmured, But it can also bring liberation. That night, the sound of wind hitting the windows seemed to bring voices. Martha tried to sleep, but memories began to flood her. She felt 18 again, the night everything changed. She remembered the lantern-lit barn, the laughter, the music, and the scream. The sound she never forgot. In the dream, she saw Thomas and Robert arguing, the fire growing in the background. She remembered the smell of smoke and the desperate feeling of running outside. When she woke, her heart was pounding. Lord, what do you want to show me? She whispered, looking at the crucifix on the wall. Outside, dawn was tinting the sky with melancholy pinks. At breakfast, Thomas seemed distant. Did you dream too? He asked quietly. Martha nodded. The barn. I saw it all. He set down his cup, trembling. So God is showing you what time has tried to hide. She felt a shiver run down her spine. Thomas, what happened that night? He was silent for a few seconds too long. It wasn't an accident, Martha. The words fell like stones. Her eyes widened. The fire. You're saying someone, Thomas interrupted. Yes. Someone set the fire on purpose. Martha clapped her hands over her mouth in shock. Oh my God! Thomas stood, walked over to the suitcase, and gently touched it. Inside is the evidence. Martha, still trembling, asked, Why bring this now? He replied, Because time is up. There are people who need to know the truth before it's too late. His gaze mingled regret and hope, as if seeking forgiveness. As they spoke, the distant sound of church bells filled the air. Martha closed her eyes for a moment. When evil tries to return, God always shows a way, she thought. Thomas stared at the cross on the wall and murmured, I spent decades trying to escape what I did, but God wouldn't leave me alone. Later, she walked into the yard, looking at the trees Thomas had planted with her in their youth. Each one seemed to hold a piece of their history. The smell of wet earth brought back memories both sweet and bitter. Why did you disappear without saying anything? She asked. He simply replied, Because I thought if I died, you would be safe. Those words echoed inside her. Safe from what, Thomas? He looked away. From me, and what I was hiding. Martha felt a chill in her chest. So that's what destroyed everything between us? He nodded slowly. No, Martha. What destroyed it was fear. And fear has always been the devil's cruelest weapon. Late that afternoon, Martha decided to visit the basement. She wanted to find the old group portrait, the one from their youth that Thomas had looked at earlier. He rummaged through dust-covered boxes until he found it. As he turned on the dim lamp, something fell to the floor, a small metal box. Inside was a photo she had never seen before. The photo showed Thomas and Robert standing next to an unknown man, with the same barn in the background. But something about it made her shiver. The man was wearing a ring with the town symbol. It was the former sheriff, who had died in the fire. And in the photo, Thomas was holding the same brown suitcase. Martha let out a startled gasp. My God, it was already there then. That night, she took the photo to Thomas. Explain this. He stared at it for a long moment and replied in a choked voice, That man wasn't who he seemed. He knew too much. And because of him, it all started. Martha felt tears well up. Thomas, are you telling me that fire was a cover-up? Thomas nodded. Yes. And I was a part of it, without knowing it. Martha took a step back in shock. You? He added, I was tricked, Martha. I used my own hands to destroy something I should have protected. Her tears fell silently. And what was inside? He replied, evidence. Of corruption. And of innocence. Martha sat up slowly. My God. And Robert. Thomas took a deep breath. Robert knew too. He tried to stop it, but when the fire started, it was too late. I thought he was dead. The silence that followed was piercing. Martha looked at the suitcase and said, So this suitcase carries more than memories. It carries sins. Thomas nodded, crying. But it also carries redemption. Martha placed her hand over his. If God brought you back, it's because there's still something to be healed. He looked at her tenderly. You always believed in me, even when I didn't deserve it. She replied, Because I know God works in silence, but he's never late. The next morning, the town seemed more alive, but Martha felt the weight of truth growing. As she walked through the local market, she heard people talking about Thomas's return. What's he back for? A woman asked. After everything that happened? Martha lowered her head. She knew that human forgiveness was always more difficult than divine forgiveness. Back home, she found an envelope under the door. It was old, yellowed, and had her name handwritten on it. Opening it, she saw a letter dated 1972. The first words made her heart race. Martha, if you're reading this, it's because I'm finally back. There's something I need to tell you. She felt her world spin. The handwriting was Thomas's, but the contents seemed written by another man. The words spoke of regret, guilt, and love. At the end, one sentence stood out. What was in the barn wasn't mine to hide. It was your right to know. Martha closed the letter with trembling hands. Lord, what does all this mean? She murmured. As dusk fell, she lit the lamps again, as she had in ancient times. Thomas appeared in the doorway, silent, and asked, You found the letter, didn't you? She nodded. Then it's all starting over again. He took a deep breath. There's something I need to show you, but you must be prepared. Martha looked at the suitcase on the table and felt her heart sink. It's in there, isn't it? He simply replied, Yes. Thunder rumbled outside, and the rain began to fall heavily. Thomas, what did you bring back for me? He looked her in the eye and said, his voice almost fading, The truth. But it doesn't come alone. The sound of rain hitting the roof seemed like a harbinger of something bigger. Martha stood and touched the suitcase gently. If it's to heal, I want to know. Thomas lowered his head. Then tomorrow at sunrise, we'll open it together. She nodded, fighting back tears. What if whatever's in there changes everything? He replied, Then maybe that's what God wants. As the clock struck midnight, Martha knelt beside her bed and prayed, Lord, give me strength to hear what I need, and peace to forgive what I don't understand. The wind blew through the open window like a silent answer. She looked up at the sky and whispered, I trust in you. Outside, amidst flashes of lightning, her suitcase waited. And that night, no one in Willow Creek slept soundly, because when the sun rose, the truth would come out, and nothing would be the same again. Dawn arrived with an eerie silence. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of damp earth and regret. Martha woke before the sun and stared at the suitcase on the table, covered by a white tablecloth. The clock struck 6 when Thomas entered, carrying with him the weight of decades unsaid. Are you ready? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. Martha nodded. The sound of the zipper opening echoed like thunder in her heart. Inside the suitcase were stacks of yellowed papers, a torn photograph, and a carefully folded letter. The envelope simply read, "To Martha, if I ever return." Her hands were shaking. Thomas closed his eyes, unable to bear the thought. "Read it," he said. "You need to hear what I could never say." Martha took a deep breath and began. The first lines were simple, but filled with love. "Dear Martha, if these words find you, it is because time has forced me to flee from what I loved most." She swallowed hard. The handwriting was familiar, but there was pain between the curves. That night, nothing went as planned. The fire wasn't meant to drive you away. It was meant to protect you. Martha felt her eyes well up. "Protect from what, Thomas?" she asked, staring at him. He simply replied, "Keep reading, and you'll understand." There was something in the barn that couldn't fall into the wrong hands. Robert knew it, the sheriff knew it, and so did I. But no one imagined the price we would pay. The fire started prematurely. By the time I realized it, it was too late. Someone wanted to destroy the truth, and destroy me along with it. Martha stopped, her heart sinking. Thomas wept silently. "If I survive, I'll carry with me the guilt of leaving you alone. But God knows, it was the only way to keep you alive." She left the letter on the table and took his hand. "You ran away, to save me?" Thomas just nodded, tears streaming down his face. The distant sound of church bells brought a bittersweet feeling. "But why now, Thomas? Why come back after so long?" He took a deep breath. "Because forgiveness isn't found by running away. And because there's something else in this letter you haven't read yet." Martha, confused, picked up the paper again and turned the last page. On the back was another handwriting, steadier, more recent. "Martha, if you're reading this now, it means I've returned with the truth. Inside the suitcase is a key. It opens the cupboard in the old barn. There lies what's left of the past, and the answer to everything." Martha looked at him, startled. "Thomas, the barn was destroyed." He took a deep breath. "Not everything." With slow steps, he removed a small, rusty key from inside his suitcase. "The basement still exists. And that's where what I hid is." Martha felt her body shiver. "What's in there, Thomas?" He answered in a choked voice, "The truth about the sheriff, and what really happened to Robert." His words fell like ice. Martha took a step back. "What? Robert?" Thomas nodded. "Not everything you believe is true." His gaze was thick, dark, filled with pain. "Robert never died that night." Martha covered her mouth with her hands. "Oh my God! No, that can't be true." Thomas continued, "He survived. But the price was too high. And he blamed me for everything. That's why I disappeared, and why he showed up here yesterday. He wants me to suffer what he suffered." Martha sat stunned. "So when he came here, it wasn't reconciliation, it was revenge?" Thomas just lowered his head. "He believes I hid something from him, something valuable," he explained. Martha looked at the suitcase. "The key?" Thomas nodded. "Yes. But not for wealth. For justice." Martha rubbed her hand across her eyes, trying to reason. "Thomas, why is God bringing all this to light now?" He replied firmly, "Because the time has come to fix what was broken." Martha clutched the letter tightly and looked up to the sky. "Lord, if this is your will, give us strength." Thomas watched silently, his face weary and his gaze lost. "I tried to hide from the truth, Martha. But it always found me, in my dreams, in my prayers, even in the sound of the wind." She read the end of the letter again, where Thomas had written, "If you ever forgive me, know that my heart has always belonged to you. And if I don't come back, remember, God never fails, even when all seems lost." Martha wept silently. It was as if time had stopped, and only the echo of pain and hope remained. For the rest of the day, Martha walked around the house in silence. The ticking of the clocks seemed to mock the lost time. Thomas remained seated, holding the suitcase open, as if he had given his heart inside. "Do you still hate me?" he asked. She replied, "No, Thomas. I just want to understand." At dusk, they decided to head to the barn. The dirt road, covered in dry leaves, seemed longer than ever. "How many years have it been?" Martha murmured. 50, Thomas replied. But some memories never grow old. The red sky seemed to weep along with them. When they arrived, the barn was in ruins. The smell of burning wood still lingered, like a ghost. Martha knelt and ran her hand through the damp earth. "This is where it all began," she said. Thomas took a deep breath. "And this is where it will all end." He held out the key. "The trapdoor is under the wooden altar." With difficulty, they removed the broken boards. The sound of rusty iron creaking echoed. Beneath was a small metal door. Thomas inserted the key and turned it. A sharp click, and the lid swung open. Inside was a chest covered in dust and cobwebs. Martha whispered, "It looks like something out of a movie." Thomas opened the trunk. Inside were burnt papers, a sheriff's badge, and an envelope sealed with red wax. He took the envelope and handed it to her. "Read it." Martha hesitated. "Do you already know what it says?" He replied, "No. But God wants you to find out." The envelope opened with a soft snap. Inside, a confession. "I, Henry Lewis, confess that I wrongfully accused Thomas Hayes. The fire was my fault. May God forgive me." Martha looked at Thomas, stunned. The sheriff took the blame. Thomas fell to his knees. "My God, he tried to exonerate me and he died for it." Their tears mingled with the smell of the earth. Martha held the letter to her chest. "So you weren't to blame, Thomas." He replied, sobbing, "But I believed you were. And that was the cruelest punishment." Martha hugged him. "God waited for the right time to free you. Not before, not after." The sun was beginning to set as they left the barn. The wind blew lightly, and for the first time in decades, Thomas seemed to breathe peacefully. "You know what's strange, Martha," he said, smiling slightly. "The guilt weighs so heavily that when it's gone, the silence seems strange." Martha smiled tenderly. "This silence is God saying it's over." Thomas looked up at the sky. "Then why do I still feel like something's missing?" She replied softly, "Because forgiveness doesn't end when the truth comes out. It begins when the heart accepts it." Back at the house, Martha carefully put the letters away. Thomas stared thoughtfully out the window. "Robert needs to know this." She replied, "Yes. And maybe when he does, everything will be resolved." Thomas, however, seemed hesitant. "There's something you don't understand, Martha." "Robert, you already know." Martha turned quickly. "What?" Thomas stared at her. "He knew all along. And yet, he left me to bear the blame." The air grew heavy. "So, this was all planned?" He nodded. "Robert wanted to see me on my knees. And now, he's coming back." Night fell with a biting chill. Martha lit the lamps as the distant sound of footsteps on the street approached. Thomas looked out the window and whispered, "He's come." Fear ran down Martha's spine. "What will happen now, Thomas?" He replied, his voice trembling, "What no one ever expected." And before he could finish his sentence, 3 loud knocks echoed at the door, the same ones from the night before. Martha looked at him, and he simply whispered, "It's too late to run now." The knocking on the door echoed like thunder. Martha looked at Thomas, her heart racing. He nodded silently, and she opened it slowly. Robert stood there, drenched from the rain, his eyes filled with something between anger and despair. "We need to talk, Thomas." The air grew heavy again. Thomas stepped forward. "Not here, Robert. Not in front of her." Robert shoved him hard. "Why not? She deserves to know everything." Martha tried to intervene, but the two were locked in a gaze of ancient war. "What happened to you two?" he asked, his voice trembling. Robert replied, "The truth, Martha. He never told you the truth." Thomas took a deep breath. "Enough, Robert. We've suffered enough." Robert laughed bitterly. "You may have suffered, brother, but I died every day because of what you did." His words hurt more than any punch. Martha looked at Thomas, confused. "What does he mean?" Robert approached her. That night, the fire started too early because someone cut the lamp wires. And that someone was Thomas. Martha recoiled, stunned. "That's not true!" Thomas shouted. "I didn't know the gasoline was there. It was an accident." Robert shook his head. "It was carelessness. And carelessness kills, too." The rain pounded against the windows. "You never owned up, Thomas. You never had the courage." Thomas replied, "And you never forgave me." The silence that followed hurt more than any words. Martha looked from one to the other, her heart breaking. "Please stop. God doesn't want this hatred between you anymore." Robert stared at her with teary eyes. "God? Where was God when everything fell apart?" Martha clutched the cross around her neck. "He was there, Robert. Even when we can't see him, he's there." Thomas fell to his knees, weeping. "I tried to fix it. I tried." Robert looked away. Too late. Suddenly, Thomas opened his suitcase and pulled out the burned envelope they'd found in the barn. Here's the sheriff's confession. He admitted everything." Robert snatched the paper, read it quickly, and turned pale. "Henry Lewis, he wrote this before he died." Thomas nodded. "He tried to exonerate me. But you disappeared, and no one believed him." Robert collapsed into a chair, his face in his hands. "I lost everything, Thomas. Our family name, my faith, my life. All because of this hell." Thomas leaned closer. "And I lost the love of the only woman who made me believe in God." Martha wept. "And now, what's left?" The clock struck midnight. The sound was like a heartbeat, steady and heavy. Robert stood. "There's still the truth." He looked at Thomas intently. "And it's not complete." Thomas frowned. "What are you talking about?" Robert replied, "You think the fire was the end? It was just the beginning." Martha was startled. "The beginning of what?" Robert paced nervously. "The sheriff didn't act alone. There was someone else that night. Someone who knew everything and never spoke." Thomas stared at him. "Who?" Robert stopped, looked directly at Martha, and said, "Ask her." The air froze. Martha froze. "What are you saying?" Robert approached slowly. "You were there too, Martha. In the barn. Before the fire." Her legs felt weak. I don't remember." Thomas looked at her in disbelief. "Martha, is that true?" Tears fell. "I remember lights, screams, but I didn't know what was happening." Robert interrupted her. "You knocked over the lamp, Martha. You were the one who lit the fire." The silence that followed seemed to rip the air from the room. Thomas recoiled in shock. "No, this can't be." Martha began to cry convulsively. "I was just a girl. I tried to help, I swear. I tripped, and it all started." Thomas fell to his feet, limp. "My God!" Robert crossed his arms. "So, for all these years, we've both been blaming the wrong man." Thomas wept, his face in his hands. "Lord, forgive us. We've lived decades of guilt and hatred over an accident." Martha trembled. "I never knew. I've erased it from my memory." Robert knelt beside her. "The guilt has destroyed us, Martha. But perhaps now we can begin to heal." The sound of the rain softened. A ray of moonlight shone through the window and illuminated the three of them. Martha took their hands and said firmly, "Enough. I don't want to carry the weight of the past anymore. If God has forgiven me, I can forgive myself too." Thomas looked at her tenderly. "You've always been the strongest among us." Robert cried for the first time in decades. "I just wish I knew why." Martha replied, "Because hate is an echo, Robert. And only love breaks the cycle." For a moment, the silence was pure. Then Thomas took a small medallion from his pocket and placed it on the table. "It was Mom's," he said. "She said whoever carried it would never stray from God's path." Martha closed her hand over the medallion. "Then it's time to return to Him." Suddenly, thunder crashed, and the lights went out. The house was completely dark. Martha sensed something strange in the air, as if they weren't alone. "Thomas, did you hear that?" He replied, "Yes." Robert lit a candle, and a shadow crossed the wall. The wind picked up. The flame flickered violently. And then, from inside the suitcase, came a low sound, almost a whisper. Martha looked up, startled. "What is that?" Thomas leaned closer, trembling. "The suitcase. Is it talking?" Robert laughed nervously. "No kidding, Thomas." But the sound grew clearer, like voices whispering. They looked at each other. Thomas slowly opened the suitcase. Inside, nothing moved. Only the papers and the letter. But the voices, they were coming from inside nonetheless. Martha recoiled. "That's impossible," Robert murmured. "Maybe they're not voices from the world here." Thomas, his eyes welling, said, "They're the voices of guilt." The words echoed through the house. Martha wept. "Is God showing us all this to free us?" Thomas replied, "Or to test us?" The candle went out on its own. And for a moment there was absolute silence, until a sharp knock on the window made them scream. When they looked, they saw something outside. A motionless figure, watching through the window. Robert ran and opened the door, but there was no one outside. Only the suitcase, now closed again, on the table. Martha fell to her knees and began to pray aloud. "Lord, have mercy on us." Thomas knelt beside her. "The voices, they're gone." Robert looked out the window at the sky. Maybe because someone finally listened. Martha took a deep breath. "So that's it. The past has been heard, and now, perhaps, we can move on." Thomas held her hand and said, "God is giving us a second chance." Martha smiled through her tears. "So let's not waste it." Outside, the wind died down. Dawn was approaching. But what no one knew was, the suitcase hadn't revealed everything yet. At the bottom, among the burned papers, something gleamed discreetly. A small silver cross, marked with ancient initials. And engraved on it, in tiny letters, was a name Martha never expected to see. She took it, trembling, and read, "Mary Hayes." Martha looked at Thomas, her face pale. "Thomas, that was your mother's name, wasn't it?" He nodded, confused. "Yes, why?" Martha swallowed. "Because that wasn't her cross." And in that instant, the three of them realized, the past still had one more voice to be heard. The morning dawned serene, as if the sky had grown weary of crying. The rain had stopped, and the first rays of sunlight streamed through the ancient windows of Martha's house. The glow fell on the silver cross found in the suitcase, reflecting a soft light. Thomas looked at it, his expression torn between awe and reverence. "Mary Hayes," he murmured, his voice trembling. "But that cross didn't belong to my mother." Martha held the pendant and felt a strange energy, as if something in her was vibrating. "Then whose is it?" she asked. Thomas replied, almost in a whisper, "The woman she tried to save that night." His words hung in the air. Martha felt her heart sink. "You mean, there was someone else in the barn?" Thomas nodded. "Yes. A woman named Grace Miller. She was trapped when the fire started." Robert looked at him, surprised. "Why didn't anyone know about this?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Because my mother hid it. She tried to save Grace, but she couldn't." Martha clutched the cross in her hands. "So, that cross was the last trace of her." Robert ran his hand over his face, overcome with emotion. "And why was that in the suitcase, Thomas?" He replied, "Because my mother put it there before she died. As a reminder of forgiveness." Martha looked up at the sky. God never leaves anything buried forever. He reveals it when the soul is ready. Thomas nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I've lived with guilt all my life. But perhaps in the end, God's forgiveness has always been waiting for me." Robert placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe this cross is the sign." Later, they gathered at the small Willow Creek church. The colored windows cast lights over the altar. Martha held the cross devoutly. "Pastor Lewis always said that God gives second chances when we least expect it," she said. Thomas smiled slightly. "And sometimes he puts us through the fire to burn away what needs to die." During the prayer, Martha felt something shift inside her. A gentle, almost supernatural peace replaced her fear. "Lord," she said softly, Thank you for allowing us to begin again." The tears fell freely, unabashedly. Thomas and Robert prayed beside her, the same weight finally melting away. But as the pastor recited Psalm 23, a metallic clang echoed inside the suitcase left on the bench. Martha turned, startled. The clasp opened by itself. From inside, a small envelope slipped out. She picked it up slowly. On the front was written, "For he who finds the cross." Thomas opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter in a feminine hand. "If you're reading this, it's because forgiveness has arrived. God showed me that guilt doesn't belong to us forever. It's the path back to love." Martha cried, touching the paper. "This handwriting is your mother's, Thomas." He smiled, moved. "So, she knew I would return one day." Robert looked at the altar. God's mercy is truly mysterious. Martha took a deep breath. "She didn't punish us, Robert. She waited for us." The church was silent for a moment, only the sound of the distant bells echoing like a soft chant. Thomas stood and walked to the front of the church. "For years, I've asked God to erase me from everyone's memory. I thought disappearing was the same as redeeming me. But He doesn't want us to run away, He wants us to face it." Martha smiled. "And that's what you did." Robert, moved, added, "And what we did together." The pastor approached and placed his hands on the three. God united what fear separated. Fire destroyed walls, but forgiveness rebuilds homes. The words echoed in their hearts like a new promise. As they left the church, the sun was already high. Martha stopped in the courtyard and looked at the horizon. "You know what I learned, Thomas?" she asked. He smiled. "What?" She replied, "That sometimes the miracle isn't God erasing the past. It's Him giving us the courage to look at it without fear." Thomas nodded, tears welling up. "And you taught me that, Martha." She smiled, wiping her face. "God taught me that. I just listened." Robert, still silent, glanced at the nearby cemetery. "I think we should go there. Mom deserves to know it's all over." Thomas nodded. "Let's go." The cemetery was surrounded by ancient trees. The leaves fell like gentle blessings. Martha placed flowers on Mary Hayes's grave and left the silver cross on the headstone. "The weight is gone," she murmured. Thomas knelt and prayed softly. "Thank you, Lord, for allowing us to write what time tried to erase." Robert walked over and placed his hand on his brother's shoulder. "You know, Thomas, I hated you for a long time. But today, I realize that hate is not the opposite of love. It's love wounded." Thomas hugged him. "So, may love be healed, brother." And there, for the first time, they truly forgave each other. Back at home, Martha made coffee. The aroma wafted over, bringing back fond memories. "God has a beautiful way of closing cycles, doesn't He?" she said. Thomas replied, "Yes. But I feel like He's not finished yet." Martha smiled. "Maybe not. Maybe there's still something He wants to show us." As they talked, Robert noticed something in the suitcase, a false compartment beneath the lining. He slowly pulled it out and found a small leather book. Martha opened it. It was Mary Hayes's diary. The first word sent shivers down everyone's spine. If anyone ever reads this, they will know that true forgiveness is not forgetting, it is liberation. Martha turned the page and read aloud, "One day, when the truth comes to light, my son will find peace. But along with it will come the test of what love can endure." Thomas frowned. What did she mean by proof? Martha closed her diary thoughtfully. "Maybe we don't know everything yet." That night, the three of them dined together for the first time in 50 years. They laughed, reminisced, and prayed. The atmosphere was light, but a sense of mystery still lingered in the air. When everyone had gone to bed, Martha was left alone, staring at her closed suitcase. Something inside her told her the past still held one last secret. She stood, walked over to her suitcase, and ran her hand over the worn leather. "Thank you, Lord, for all you've already shown us. But if there's still something, prepare my heart to bear it." The wind blew through the window, rustling the curtains. And for a moment, Martha swore she heard a soft, feminine voice whisper, "It's not over yet." She looked around, startled. "Who's there?" No one answered. Only the distant sound of the clock ticking away. Martha clutched the Bible to her chest and prayed softly. "If it is your will, Lord, show me what is missing." Outside, the moon illuminated the house with an almost sacred light. The next morning, Thomas woke with a feeling of foreboding. "Martha, we need to go back to the barn." She looked surprised. "Again?" He nodded. "I dreamed about my mother. She told me to go there and listen." Robert sighed. "Listen to what?" Thomas replied, "The voices that remain." Martha hesitated, but something in his tone rang true. "If God has shown you this, we can't ignore it." And so the three of them set off once more to the old barn, the rising sun guiding their way. There, amid the ruins and the silence, Thomas knelt and said, "Lord, we are here." The wind blew hard, and the sound that followed was like an ancient melody. It was as if the air itself were singing. Martha wept. "It sounds like a choir of angels." Thomas closed his eyes. "Maybe it is." And then a female voice, sweet and distant, whispered on the wind, "Now you are free." They embraced, tears in their eyes. The peace that descended upon that place didn't come from this world, it came from heaven. Thomas looked at Martha and said, "I think this was the second chance God promised." She smiled, moved. "And he never fails." Robert looked at the horizon. "After so many years of pain, I finally understand. The fire wasn't punishment. It was purification." Martha nodded. "And the cross was the sign." The sun began to rise fully, bathing the barn in a soft golden light. Thomas held Martha's hand. "The guilt is gone. But what now?" She smiled tenderly. "Now we live, because God has given us back the time we thought we'd lost." He closed his eyes and murmured, "Then let the new begin." But when they returned home, Martha noticed something different. The purse, left on the table, was open again. Inside, Mary Hayes's diary had been turned to a page no one remembered reading. And there, in small print, was a new sentence. "When the past is forgiven, the future begins to speak." Martha took a deep breath, feeling the journey wasn't over yet. There was something, or someone, trying to communicate. And deep in her heart, she knew, the voice that would return wouldn't be human. The dawn at Willow Creek seemed brighter than ever, but inside Martha's house, the air was heavy with anticipation. The suitcase, now open, reeked of time and memory. Thomas and Robert watched in silence as Martha read the last sentence of her diary. "When the past is forgiven, the future begins to speak." "This is a message," Thomas said, his eyes welling up. Martha nodded. "But from whom?" Robert looked more closely at the diary and noticed something different. "These letters look fresh. Someone wrote this recently." Martha felt a shiver run down her spine. "But no one has been here." She flipped through the pages, and one of them seemed glued shut. Martha carefully ran her finger over it until it came loose. Inside was a small, folded sheet of paper with an old-fashioned stamp. The engraved name read, "Grace Miller." She froze. "The woman your mother tried to save," Thomas murmured. Robert took the paper. "Is this a birth certificate?" Thomas looked closely. "Yes. And there's something else." Silence filled the room. Martha read aloud, "Daughter, Grace Miller. Mother, Mary Hayes." Thomas stood still, his face drained of color. "No, that can't be." Martha dropped the paper. "Thomas, does that mean," he finished almost voicelessly, "my mother had another daughter?" Robert recoiled in shock. "A sister?" Thomas nodded shakily. "Yes. And she died in the fire." Martha took a deep breath. "But what if she didn't?" Thomas's gaze lit with hope and fear. "Do you think she survived?" Martha clutched the paper to her chest. "God doesn't write half-hearted stories. If this revelation came now, it's because something is still alive." Robert ran his hands through his hair. "But how would we know that after all this time?" Martha went to the suitcase again. At the bottom, hidden beneath the lining, was a small photograph. It was of a little girl with braids and very familiar eyes. On the back, a date, 1958, and a handwritten word, "Save." Thomas sat up slowly. "Oh my God!" Robert looked at him. "Thomas, she looks just like you." Martha felt tears well up in her eyes. "And like your mother." Thomas stared at the photo. "This changes everything. My mother didn't try to save Grace. She tried to save her own daughter." The weight of the discovery left the three of them silent. "But why hide something like that?" Martha asked. Thomas replied, his voice breaking, "Maybe because back then, being a single mother was shameful. Or maybe because she was protecting the girl from someone." Robert frowned. "From the sheriff?" Thomas nodded. "Yes. He knew everything." Martha, confused, asked, "So the fire was an attempt to eliminate the evidence, and the child?" Thomas looked at her sadly. "And I helped without knowing it. I believed I was erasing the town's past, when in fact, I was burning my family's." Martha took his hand. "God knew you would find out someday." Thomas bowed his head. "And he bided his time." Robert stood. "We need to find this girl. Or what's left of her." Martha looked at the paper again. "There's an address here. Springfield, Illinois." Thomas's eyes widened. "That's where my mother traveled every fall." Martha stood. "Then that's where we're going." Robert hesitated. "But it's hours of driving." Martha replied firmly, "The truth doesn't wait." And so they set off in Thomas's old car, taking the suitcase and the silver cross with them. The road seemed endless, surrounded by golden fields and gentle winds. Martha stared out the window, praying silently. "Lord, if it's your will, show us what we need to see." Thomas drove in silence, focused. Robert read the diary, trying to piece it together. It says here that Mary left Grace safe, with a family named Whitmore. When they arrived in Springfield, time seemed to stand still. The houses were old, and the air smelled of the past. Martha held the address in her hand. 12 Pine Street. Thomas parked in front of a white house with flowers in the garden. Her heart pounded. A gray-haired woman opened the door. "Can I help you?" Martha smiled fondly. "We're looking for someone who may have lived here many years ago." "Grace Miller." The woman hesitated. "Grace Miller. That name sounds familiar." "Wait a moment." She disappeared and returned with an old photo. In the photo, a smiling young woman held a little girl. "That was my mother. And that girl is me." Martha felt the ground disappear. "What's your name?" she asked. The woman smiled. "Rebecca. Rebecca Whitmore." Thomas could hardly breathe. "My God, she has her mother's eyes." Martha took a deep breath. "Rebecca, do you think it's possible your mother was saved from a fire as a child?" Rebecca looked thoughtful. "She always talked about a woman named Mary who pulled her out of the fire. She said she was an angel." Martha and Thomas looked at each other. "Mary Hayes," she whispered. Thomas approached slowly. "Rebecca, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Do you have any memories of this woman?" Rebecca smiled softly. "Not many. Just a silver cross she left me." She went to a drawer and took out a necklace. Martha put her hand to her mouth. "It's identical to ours." Thomas wept. "Rebecca, that cross belonged to my mother." "Does that mean—" She interrupted him, overcome with emotion. "Does that mean you're her son?" He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yes. And you're my sister." Rebecca hugged him tightly. "So that's why I've always felt like a part of me was missing." Martha wept, touching the crucifix. "God is faithful. Even when all seems lost, He unites what the world separates." Robert, his eyes brimming with tears, murmured, "The fire destroyed the barn, but not the promise." Thomas looked up at the sky. "Mom fulfilled her purpose. She saved her daughter, and now she's saved us." Rebecca invited everyone in. In the living room, a picture of Mary Hayes hung on the mantelpiece. "She visited me every year until I was 10. Then she never came back." Martha smiled. "She was called home. But she left her love with you." Over coffee, Rebecca shared stories of her adoptive mother, Grace, who had passed away a few years earlier. She used to tell me that the woman who rescued me talked a lot about faith and forgiveness. Now I know why. Thomas smiled. She said that to all of us. Before they left, Rebecca handed Thomas an antique wooden box. I found this among Mom's things. I could never open it. Thomas opened it slowly. Inside was an old Bible and a note. To Thomas, when you're ready to forgive me, he cried silently. Martha placed her hand on the Bible. This is the revelation. Forgiveness was the ultimate secret. Thomas opened the first page. Inside was an old photo of Mary holding two children, himself and Rebecca. On the back, a sentence, God never separates those whom he has united in love. They lay there, holding each other, crying silently. The house seemed enveloped in a supernatural peace. Outside, the wind swayed the flowers in the garden as if someone were touching them. Martha looked up at the sky and murmured, Now it all makes sense. The suitcase didn't hold guilt. It held grace. Thomas smiled through his tears. The grace of God, and Grace Miller. Robert chuckled softly. I never thought salvation would come in an old suitcase. Martha replied, That's how God works. He hides miracles in places no one looks. Back on the road, the sun was setting golden. Thomas drove in silence, his suitcase now empty in the back seat. Martha watched the horizon. Do you feel it? She asked. What? He replied. The lightness. When we forgive, the past loses its weight. Thomas smiled. It's the feeling of being clean, inside. Robert glanced at the rearview mirror. The trunk is empty now. Martha replied, Yes, because it has already served its purpose. Thomas added, And maybe now the real secret is no longer inside it, but inside us. As the car pulled away down the dirt road, a final gust of wind blew open the diary on the back seat. The pages moved on their own until they stopped on a previously unseen entry. In neat handwriting, it read, When you find each other, look inside the suitcase again. Martha looked back and saw the diary open. Her heart raced. Thomas, maybe it's not over yet. He smiled serenely. Maybe the future is the next secret. And so the golden horizon seemed to promise not an end, but a new beginning. The return to Willow Creek was silent. The car glided along the road as the sunset tinted the sky copper and pink. Thomas kept his eyes fixed on the road, and Martha, with Mary Hayes's Bible in her lap, prayed softly. Everything finally seemed peaceful, but the suitcase in the back seat seemed to breathe. Did you feel that? Martha asked, looking in the mirror. Thomas looked away. What? She hesitated, as if the suitcase had moved. Robert laughed nervously. After everything we've seen, I don't doubt anything anymore. Thomas sighed. If it's God, let him speak. If it's the devil, let him be silent. When they arrived, the city looked different. People watched with curious, almost frightened looks. In the square, a local newspaper carried an old, reprinted headline, The Willow Creek Fire, Unsolved Mystery. Martha frowned. Why are you talking about this again now? Thomas parked in front of the church. Maybe because the past comes back when we try to bury it. Martha got out, watching the wind play with the leaves. What do you think is still missing, Thomas? He replied with a distant look in his eyes. The last part of the truth. When they entered the house, the suitcase was where they had left it. Closed, clean, as if someone had taken care of it. Martha looked suspiciously. Did you clean it? Thomas shook his head. No. Robert examined the zipper. There are new marks, like it's been opened again. Martha felt her heart sink. Did someone come in? Thomas slowly opened the suitcase. Inside, something had changed. The papers and diary were the same, but now there was a new photograph. In black and white, it showed a group of people, and in the center, Sheriff Henry Lewis, smiling. Behind the photo, a handwritten phrase, The truth has not yet been told. Martha looked at Thomas, alarmed. Who put this here? Robert replied, Maybe whoever wanted the story to stay alive. Thomas studied the photo closely. Wait, that man next to the sheriff, that's the mayor at the time. Martha recognized another face. "And this woman, she's Helen's mother, our neighbor." Robert sighed. "So the fire involved more people than we realized." Thomas nodded. "They were covering something up." Martha glanced out the window, worried. What if someone is still trying to hide it? That night, while everyone slept, Martha heard footsteps on the porch. The creaking of the wood made her heart race. She grabbed a candle and walked into the living room. The suitcase was open again. On the floor, a newspaper, dated 1972, carried an article about a $1 million donation made shortly after the fire. "The mayor donated to the local church," Martha read aloud. Thomas appeared on the stairs, sleepy. "What are you reading?" She held up the newspaper. "Thomas, what if the fire wasn't just to hide what happened, but to embezzle money?" Robert ran downstairs. "This changes everything." Thomas frowned. So the fire didn't just destroy lives, it destroyed evidence of corruption. Martha held up the silver cross. "And God waited for the right time to reveal it." Robert glanced at the newspaper. "But if that's true, someone still has a lot to lose." The next morning, the whole town seemed in turmoil. The pastor called Thomas into church. "Son, I hear you're reopening old wounds. Be careful. Some people prefer the past buried." Thomas replied, "I don't want revenge, Pastor. I just want the truth." When they returned home, they found the door ajar. The suitcase was on the floor, empty. Martha clapped her hands over her mouth. "Oh my God!" Robert ran into the backyard. "There's no sign of a break-in," Thomas murmured. "Someone was here and knew exactly what to look for." Hours later, neighbor Helen appeared, distraught. "Martha, I found this near the fence." It was Mary Hayes's diary, partially burned. Martha clutched it, crying. "Why? Why would anyone do this?" Thomas replied, his voice firm, "Because there are still secrets someone wants to hide." That night, Martha couldn't sleep. She sat reading what was left of the diary. On one of the charred pages was a barely legible sentence. "The fire didn't start in the barn," she read aloud, trembling. "It didn't start in the barn. Then where?" Thomas grabbed the flashlight and peered outside. "The barn was just a distraction." Robert added, "So the real fire started somewhere else." Martha put the pieces together. At the church, silence fell like thunder. Thomas paled. "My God, that's why the pastor warned us." They ran to the church, still in the early morning darkness. When they opened the back door, a strong smell of mold and old wood filled the air. Thomas lit a candle. "This is where it all began." Robert found a loose board on the floor. Beneath it, a rusty safe. Martha held Mary's Bible tightly. "Lord, guide us." Thomas opened the safe with effort. Inside were yellowed papers and an accounting notebook. "These are records of donations and embezzlement." Martha leafed through them. "They used church money for illegal businesses." Robert added, "And the sheriff knew. That's why they tried to silence him." Thomas looked at the altar, overcome with emotion. "Mom found out. That's why she wanted to destroy the evidence." Martha replied, "No, Thomas. She wanted to save the people. But someone started the fire early." Robert looked at him. "The mayor." Thomas nodded. "And he still has family here." The next morning, news spread. The old story of the fire was being talked about again on every street corner. Some said Thomas was distraught, others that God had sent him to reveal the truth. Martha simply prayed, "May justice come from your hand, Lord." Days later, an envelope arrived at the door. No return address. Inside, a single photo, Thomas kneeling in the ruined barn, taken recently. Martha paled. "Someone is watching us." Thomas clenched his fists. "So they want to silence me again." That night, the wind blew hard, and the suitcase, which they had left empty, slammed shut. Thomas approached. Inside, now there was only a new note. "Some truths do not belong in the light." Martha held the note and whispered, "But God does." Fear crept back into the house. Helen, their neighbor, tried to comfort them. "You've messed with powerful people, Martha. Let it go." Martha replied, "I can't. Truth is light, and light must shine." Thomas looked at her proudly. "That's why I came back." Robert, more cautious, looked out the window. "But what if this fight is costly?" Martha replied, "The truth always costs. But lies cost the soul." And with those words, she lit a candle before the silver cross and began to pray aloud, feeling a welcoming presence in the air. Suddenly, there was a sharp knock on the door. 3 times. Just like before. Thomas went over and opened it. A man in a dark suit, unfamiliar, held an envelope. "Are you Thomas Hayes?" He nodded. "I was told to deliver this." The man turned and disappeared into the night. Inside the envelope was an official document, a summons to court. "They want to sue me for defamation," Thomas said in disbelief. Martha took a deep breath. "So it's true. They're trying to silence you." Robert gritted his teeth. "But they won't succeed." In the following days, the town was divided. Some called Thomas a hero, others a liar. The church remained silent. Martha, steadfast in her faith, remembered Mary Hayes's words, "God waits for the right time to act." And she knew the time was coming. One night, alone in the living room, Martha looked at the suitcase one last time. "If there's anything left, Lord, show it now." The clasp opened by itself. Inside, a piece of the burned diary bore a final, almost faded note. "The truth sets you free, but first, it burns." She smiled, tears streaming down her face. "Then let him burn what he needs, Lord. Just don't let the lie survive." Outside, the moon illuminated the city, which slept restlessly. The shadows of the past still lingered, but Martha's faith burned like holy fire. And in her heart, a certainty grew. The judgment that would come would not only be from men, but also from God. The morning of the trial dawned cold and silent. Martha woke early, lit a candle before the silver cross, and prayed, "Lord, don't let lies prevail. Give us courage to stand in the truth, even when it hurts." The sun hadn't yet risen, but inside that house was a different light, a light of faith. Thomas came down the stairs wearing the same suit he'd worn to his father's wedding so many years ago. "You know, Martha, I thought this day would be the end of me. But I feel like it's only the beginning." She smiled tenderly. "God doesn't close doors without opening windows, Thomas. Go in peace, he goes with you." In the small Willow Creek courtroom, all eyes were on him. The murmur of people seemed like a sea of confused voices, some supportive, some judgmental. Robert sat beside Martha, holding her hand tightly. Today is not about proving innocence. It's about proving faith. When the judge entered, silence fell. Thomas was called to the center of the room. The charges were clear: defamation, disturbance of the peace, and desecration of church property. But what truly accused him was his past. Martha watched with a firm heart. "Lord, let your justice shine forth," she prayed silently. The first witness was Helen, the neighbor. She stood up nervously. I've known Thomas since he was young. He's made mistakes, but he's never been bad." The opposing attorney scoffed. "Are you saying he's a saint?" Helen replied firmly, "No, I'm saying he's human, and God forgives those who seek forgiveness." Her words touched the audience. Thomas, moved, lowered his head. Martha felt the Holy Spirit move through the room, transforming tension into compassion. The judge, intrigued, asked to hear Mary Hayes's diary. Thomas stood and began to read. His voice trembled, but his soul was at peace. When truth sleeps in the dark, God awakens it with the fire of faith. The words echoed. Martha wiped away her tears. "It was the fire that destroyed the barn, but it was also the fire that brought us here," she said softly. The entire room seemed to listen, silent, as if time itself had stopped. Then something unexpected happened. A woman stood up in the back of the room. It was Rebecca, the lost sister. "Your Honor, may I speak?" The judge hesitated, but nodded. "I am Mary Hayes's daughter. What Thomas said is true. My mother saved me from a fire, and he is not to blame. He is the miracle." The murmur grew louder. Some wept, others stood for a better view. The judge banged his gavel, calling for silence. "Madam, "Do you have proof of what you say?" Rebecca showed the silver cross. "This cross is the symbol of what God did. From fire, he drew life. From sin, he drew forgiveness." The entire room applauded, moved. The judge, his voice breaking, took a deep breath. "Mr. Hayes, I cannot judge a man's heart, but I can acknowledge the truth. The charges against you are hereby dismissed." Thomas closed his eyes, tears falling. Martha whispered, "Glory be to God." The whole city looked different that day. People who had once turned away now reached out. Martha walked the streets with a light heart. "See, Thomas," she said, "the truth burns, but forgiveness heals." He smiled. "And you were the bomb, Martha." That evening, their house was full. Helen brought apple pie, Rebecca brought flowers, and even the pastor came. "I've never seen anything like it," he said. "A whole city rising from the ashes." Martha replied, "It was God who breathed on us." During dinner, Thomas grew thoughtful. "Martha, do you know what hurts me most?" She looked at him curiously. "That hatred has stolen so many years from me." She took his hand. "God gives us back the time that sin stole from us. Maybe not as before, but better, with peace." Later, Martha stood alone on the porch, gazing up at the starry sky. "Lord," she said, "thank you for showing that your love is greater than our mistakes." A light breeze blew, and she felt something, as if someone were hugging her. She smiled. "I know, Mary. You are at peace now." The next day, Thomas received a letter. It was from the current mayor. "Mr. Hayes, after reviewing the records found, we have decided to officially reopen the arson case." Thomas sighed. "It's not over yet." Martha encouraged him. "Forgiveness heals, but the whole truth sets you free." During the new investigation, other names were uncovered, politicians and businessmen of the time. The entire city watched in shock. "My God," Helen murmured, "so many lies hidden under a single fire." Martha replied, "But God's fire reveals everything." Over time, Willow Creek began to change. The old church was restored, now with a new stained-glass window, a silver cross shining in the center. Martha helped organize a special service. "We'll call it the Day of Grace," she said, "to remind us that God never gives up on us." In the sermon, the pastor quoted Romans 8:28, "We know that all things work together for good to those who love God." Thomas held Martha's hand, overcome with emotion. "You cooperated, didn't you?" She smiled. "God turned ashes into seeds." But not everything was resolved. That night, when they returned home, the suitcase, now stored in the closet, was open once again. Inside, a new sheet of paper. "This is impossible," Thomas said. Martha read what was written. "The peace that comes from God is not the end. It is the beginning of something eternal." She smiled. "Then there's no need to fear what's coming." Thomas looked at her tenderly. "And what's coming?" She replied, "The new dawn," and hugged him tightly. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, washing away the past, watering the future. That night, Martha dreamed of Mary Hayes. She stood in a golden field, smiling, holding a child by the hand. "You did it, my daughter," she said. "Pain turned to blessing. Fire turned to faith." Martha woke crying, but her tears were sweet. Days later, Martha began writing her own story. "I don't want anyone to forget what God did here," she said. And, next to the title, she wrote, "Forgiveness that Heals." Every word was a prayer, every memory a seed of hope. News of the Willow Creek miracle spread across the state. People came from far and wide to visit the church, touch the stained-glass window, and pray before the silver cross. Many said they felt something inexplicable, a peace that healed old wounds. Martha just smiled. "That's the Holy Spirit." One day, while arranging the flowers on the altar, Martha found a final page fallen from her suitcase. Written in Mary's handwriting, it read, "If forgiveness is the end, then eternity is the beginning." Martha knelt and prayed. "So, Lord, let me experience this new beginning in you." Thomas, watching from a distance, smiled. "Martha, you're the miracle I've been waiting for my whole life." She replied tenderly, "No, Thomas. We're each other's miracle." He laughed, wiping his eyes. And to think it all started with an old suitcase. Martha looked at the horizon, and finished with a new heart. Thomas added, or maybe he's just beginning. She looked at him with serene faith. God always has another page to write. And when the church bell rang in the distance, the whole city seemed to breathe a breath of hope. The ashes of the past no longer hurt, they were now the fertilizer of a new era. And as the wind blew gently across the hills, Martha smiled up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for teaching us that love is forgiveness that heals." But something inside her knew there would still be one last dawn, one in which the sky itself would bring a new revelation. The dawn still held the winter chill, but the air felt different that morning. Martha woke before the sun, feeling something in her heart, a sweet premonition, as if the sky itself were calling her. She opened the window and saw the golden horizon emerging behind the hills. "It's today," she whispered. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his gaze serene. "Couldn't sleep." She smiled. "I didn't want to. I felt like the Lord wanted me to be awake to see what He's going to do." Robert came down soon after, bringing hot coffee. "Do you feel that too? Like something sacred is in the air?" Outside, the entire town was still asleep. But in the small Willow Creek church, the silver cross reflected a strangely vivid light. Martha looked out the window and saw that the stained glass window seemed to shine brighter than ever. "Thomas, do you see that?" He nodded in wonder. "Yes, like the sun itself inside the church." Without hesitation, they headed there. The dirt road seemed lighter, as if the wind were pushing the car with invisible hands. When they arrived, the gate was unlocked. The door opened by itself, and a warm breeze enveloped them. The air smelled of jasmine and peace. Inside the church, light streamed through the stained glass window and formed patterns on the floor, crosses, circles, and hearts. Martha stood before the altar. "I feel like He's here." Thomas knelt. "He's always been there, Martha. We just didn't see Him." Outside, the first ray of sunlight rang the bell tower. A soft, almost angelic sound filled the air. The bell swung on its own, even without wind. Robert, overcome with emotion, murmured, "This is impossible." Martha replied, "Nothing is impossible for those who believe." And she fell to her knees, weeping, overcome by a peace that words could not describe. Suddenly, the suitcase, left at the foot of the altar, opened by itself. Inside was a single sheet of paper, glowing as if written with light. Martha picked it up carefully. The words seemed alive. "When the last dawn comes, you will see me again." Thomas felt his heart race. "It's Mom's handwriting." Martha took his hand. "She means love isn't gone, it just changed places." Robert nodded. Love transcends time, fire, and death. Outside, the sun finally rose, and the light pierced the stained glass window like a golden beam. The silver cross above the altar began to reflect that glow until it filled the entire church with light. Thomas burst into tears. "Martha, do you see?" She replied, her eyes brimming with tears. "Yes, Thomas, it's her." And for an instant, everyone saw. A gentle figure, made of light and tenderness, appeared before the altar. It was Mary Hayes, smiling, her face serene. Her voice sounded like a chant. "Forgiveness is the bridge between what was and what will be. You have crossed." Martha wept. "Mary," Thomas whispered, "Mother." Her presence radiated warmth and peace. "You were chosen to prove that God's love is stronger than any guilt. Now, live. Tell what you saw. Don't let faith die where fire once lived." Tears streamed down their faces like liquid blessings. Then the figure began to fade into the light. Before disappearing, Mary looked at Martha and smiled. "Thank you for taking care of my children." Martha placed her hand on her heart. "It was God who took care of them. I only obeyed." And with a final flash, the apparition dissolved, leaving the church in sacred silence. No one spoke for a few minutes. Only the sound of the bell continued, soft, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Thomas stood slowly. "I saw it, with my own eyes." Robert whispered, "It was no dream. It was a promise fulfilled." Martha held up the silver cross and said, The last dawn has come. Outside, the city began to wake up. People emerged from their homes and looked up at the sky in wonder. An arc of light formed over the church, something between a sunrise and a rainbow. Helen, the neighbor, placed a hand on her chest. "Do you see this, Martha?" She replied, "I do. It's God showing that forgiveness wins." In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek was never the same. The fire case was officially closed, and a plaque was placed in front of the church. Here, God turned guilt into grace. Tourists came from far and wide to learn about the story. Martha smiled at everyone, but her gaze always went beyond, to the sky. Thomas, now more serene, began helping at the church. "I want to dedicate the rest of my days to serving the one who gave me my life back," he said. Robert opened a small community school. "I want to teach children that the truth sets them free, but forgiveness saves." Martha was proud of them as if they were children of the same miracle. But one afternoon, while cleaning the altar, Martha found something under the white cloth. It was the old suitcase, closed. "But I left this in the attic," he murmured. He opened it slowly. Inside, only the silver cross and a new note. "The light is not mine. It is yours. Spread it." She fell to her knees, weeping. "Lord, thank you for trusting us." Thomas approached. "What is it?" She held up the note. "It seems the story isn't over yet." He smiled. "Then let it remain in our hands." That Sunday, Martha was invited to speak at church. Her voice rang out firmly. "There was a time when fire destroyed this city. But today, there is another fire, the fire of the Holy Spirit, burning in every heart. And this fire doesn't destroy, it heals." The congregation gave a standing ovation. Thomas wept quietly, proudly. Rebecca, in the front row, held the silver cross in both hands. Helen murmured, "I never thought I'd live to see something like this." Martha replied, smiling, "Neither did I. But God always writes endings we never imagined." That night, after the service, Martha sat alone on the porch, gazing at the sky. The stars seemed closer. "Lord, I know my journey is almost over, but if it is your will, use my life until the last dawn." The wind blew gently in answer. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she heard a familiar voice. "Thank you, Martha." She opened her eyes and saw Mary Hayes's smile in the reflection of the window. She wasn't startled. She simply smiled back. "Goodbye, my friend." The next day, the sun rose more golden than ever. The flowers had opened early, and the air smelled sweet of spring. Thomas called out to her, but Martha was already at peace. Sitting in the porch chair, she held the silver cross with a slight smile on her face. A ray of light broke through the window and fell upon her, like a hug from heaven. Thomas fell to his knees, weeping. She went, at the last dawn. Robert hugged him. She accomplished her mission. And for the first time in decades, no one cried in pain, they cried in gratitude. The entire town turned out for the funeral. The church bell rang 12 times, once for each chapter of Martha's life. At the altar, the pastor read the words she had written days earlier, "Don't let faith fall asleep. Forgiveness is the dawn of every soul." The sun shone brightly at that moment, illuminating everyone. Thomas looked up at the sky and whispered, "She's come home." Robert added, "and left Willow Creek more alive than ever." The wind blew lightly, carrying white petals over the cemetery. The suitcase remained on the church altar, now sealed. No one ever opened it again. But every time the sun rose, a mysterious glow appeared around it, as if a piece of heaven still remained inside. And so, at Willow Creek, the past became light, pain became faith, and love became eternity. The last dawn was not the end. It was the beginning of everything that will never die. Time passed, but Martha Thompson's name was never forgotten in Willow Creek. Her White House, now covered in ivy and lilac flowers, became a pilgrimage site. People from all over came to pray in the garden where she used to converse with God. They said the air there was different, light, healing, full of peace. The silver cross remained on the church altar, glowing even on cloudy days. Some said that at sunset it emitted a soft light, as if reminding the faithful that love never dies. Thomas cared for it devotedly. "It was my mother's last gift, and Martha's first miracle," he said emotionally. Robert opened the community school Martha had always dreamed of. On the walls, he had a quote from her painted, "Forgiveness is the hardest and most beautiful lesson God teaches." The children read aloud every morning, and the sound of the children's voices sounded like prayer. Rebecca, the lost sister, continued to live in Springfield, but visited Willow Creek whenever she could. "This place reminds me that grace knows no bounds," she would say. When she arrived, she helped Thomas at church, organizing services and charity events. With each visit, she left flowers on Martha's grave. The city, once gray and silent, was now full of color. The market reopened on Sundays, families returned to the square, and the church bells rang joyfully. "It's as if God rewrote our history," said Helen, the neighbor. And Martha was the pen he used. Thomas grew old with serenity. Every morning, he read his mother's Bible and Martha's diary side by side. "These two books remind me that heaven and earth speak together when there is love." On summer afternoons, he would sit on the porch and tell the children the story of the brown suitcase. None of them left without tears and faith in their hearts. One day, a reporter from Chicago came to interview him. "Mr. Hayes, what do you think Martha left as the most valuable gift to this city?" Thomas smiled, looking up at the sky. "She brought God closer to us. And she taught us that forgiveness is the language heaven speaks." Willow Creek Church has been renovated again, now with stained glass windows depicting the story. In the center, the fire, a symbol of purification. Around it, figures with clasped hands represent Martha, Thomas, Robert, Rebecca, and Mary Hayes. At the top, the sun rising, with an engraved phrase, "Love resurrects everything." On the anniversaries of his death, the entire town would gather. The bell would ring 12 times, and everyone would fall silent for a minute. Then, excerpts from his letters and prayers would be read. Children would release white balloons, which would slowly rise into the sky as messages of gratitude. Thomas, now with snow-white hair, always said, "I don't know if God has forgiven me, but I know I live to prove what he can do with those who surrender." Martha visited him in his dreams, and he always woke with the same feeling, that eternity was calling him tenderly. Rebecca wrote a book about everything that happened. She called it The Suitcase of Grace. The book spread across the country, inspiring churches, families, and even prisons. "There is no heart that God cannot open," the dedication read. In the foreword, Rebecca wrote, "One woman's forgiveness healed a city." One day, an elderly woman arrived at the church from North Carolina. She wept before the cross and said, "I lived with hatred for 40 years. But after I heard about Martha, I decided to forgive my brother. It was like lifting stones off my chest." Thomas just smiled. So the miracle continues. And it continued. With each person who entered that church, something happened. Some cried, others smiled, some felt an inexplicable warmth in their chest. Everyone left different. The silver cross seemed to respond to faith, shining brighter as someone surrendered to grace. One day, Robert found a letter left under the altar. It was anonymous, written in a gentle hand, "Don't let the flame go out. I am here, every dawn." He took it to Thomas. "Do you think it was someone from the city?" Thomas smiled. "Yes, from the city sky." That evening, a golden sunset covered Willow Creek. The clouds seemed made of light. Thomas sat on the porch, gazing at the horizon. "You know, Robert," he said, "sometimes I think Martha wasn't just a woman. I think she was an angel in disguise." Robert laughed. So God chose the perfect disguise. The years passed, and Thomas passed away peacefully, beside the silver cross, with a serene smile. At the wake, the pastor said, "Today, two worlds meet again. The son and the mother, the man and the faith." The town wept, but also sang. After all, in Willow Creek, death wasn't the end, it was the return home. Rebecca took over the church after that. She continued preaching Martha's words, always reminding herself, the suitcase was just the beginning. In her sermons, she would say, "If you carry old guilt, open it before God. He is the only one capable of emptying heavy suitcases." Decades later, generations still told the story. Children learned about the miracle of the suitcase in schools, and adults remembered it on Christmas Eve. Because one person's forgiveness can rekindle the faith of an entire city, said the younger pastor. The old barn was rebuilt and transformed into a memorial. There, a stained glass window depicted a flame transforming into a dove. At the base, an inscription, "From the ashes, love rose." Visitors knelt there and prayed for new beginnings. A group of elderly women from the city founded a small ministry called Martha's Light. They visited hospitals and nursing homes, bringing flowers and messages of hope. God is never late, they said. He arrives at just the right time, like Martha's last dawn. A child once asked her teacher, "Auntie, is Martha still alive in heaven?" The teacher smiled. "Yes." And every time someone forgives, she smiles back. The children looked out the window, and the sun streamed in, golden, as if confirming it. On the 100th anniversary of the Willow Creek fire, the town gathered again. The bell rang 12 times, and the minister read an excerpt from Mary Hayes's diary, "When guilt fades, love ignites." People cried, holding each other, as the sun rose behind the hill, the very place where it all began. Rebecca, now elderly, placed flowers on Martha's grave. "You've transformed my life, sister. And you continue to transform the world." A butterfly landed on the flowers, and she smiled. "I know it's you saying everything's okay." In the sky, the sun shone brighter, reflecting off the silver cross. The entire church filled with light, and the stained glass windows cast golden hearts onto the walls. People knelt, softly singing, "Great is the Lord, and his mercy endures forever." And at that moment, a breeze swept through the temple, as if Martha's own spirit were passing through, blessing everyone. The candles flickered, but none went out. On the contrary, they all seemed to burn brighter. The suitcase, still stored beneath the altar, exuded a faint scent of jasmine. And for a brief second, everyone swore they heard a sweet voice whispering, "Forgive. Always forgive. Because that's how heaven begins." And so, the legacy of Martha, Mary, Thomas, and all who believed that love is stronger than fire, crossed generations, healed hearts, and became God's eternal promise. At Willow Creek, the fire was long ago extinguished, but the flame of faith will never go out. Dear soul who has listened this far, if you've reached this point in the story, it's because something inside you believes that love can still heal any wound. The journey of Martha, Thomas, and Mary Hayes isn't just a story, it's a mirror of what we all carry: guilt, silence, delayed forgiveness. How many times have you looked back and wished for a second chance? How many nights have you cried remembering someone who's gone, or something that could have been different? The good news, my dear, is that God still writes new pages every day, and it's never too late to start over. Martha taught us that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about setting ourselves free. That God's love doesn't come to erase what we were, but to transform what we can still be. And that even when fire destroys everything, the Holy Spirit breathes on the ashes and makes flowers bloom where there was only pain. Have you ever felt this? That peace that comes from nowhere, when we decide to surrender what we don't understand. Because that's exactly where miracles begin, the moment the soul says, "Lord, I trust." That's what Martha did, and that's what God wants to do with you today. Maybe there's someone you need to forgive, or maybe someone who needs to forgive you. And if so, why not start now? Take a deep breath. Close your eyes for a moment and say softly, "I surrender, Lord." Feel the weight lift from your chest. This is heaven opening up within you. Life doesn't promise us easy days, but it does offer us daily new beginnings. The same God who healed Martha can heal your soul today. He still does the impossible, still rebuilds homes, still transforms tears into purpose. And if this story touched your heart, it's because it was written for you. Not by chance, not by luck, but by destiny. The destiny God creates when He wants to remind us that faith never grows old, that love never expires, and that forgiveness is the beginning of everything. Before I finish, I want to tell you something from the bottom of my heart. May God bless you with all His infinite love. May He grant you health, serenity, and the joy of living each day as if it were a gift. Because, my friend, life still has much to offer you. And if this story spoke to your soul, if it made you cry, smile, or simply believe again, I invite you to stay with me. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so we can continue together, sharing faith, emotion, and hope. Tell me in the comments, Have you ever experienced something that only God could explain? Have you ever forgiven someone who hurt you and felt light again? I want to read your story, because when we share faith, it multiplies. And remember, forgiveness is the beginning of all healing, and love is the last dawn that never fades.